We'll move to questions without notice. I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. I refer to the CCCFMEU, the corrupt and criminal construction union, and a significant donor and a very successful donor to the Prime Minister's party. Prime Minister, the CFMEU donated $5 million to the Labor Party in the last 3 years and advocates for a policy which will drive up housing and building prices. The Labor Party has sided with union bosses over home buyers, which will drive up construction costs. Why is Labor making a bad situation worse?
Order. I call the Prime Minister.
I thank very much the Leader of the Opposition for the question. I congratulate him on his election as Leader of the Liberal Party. I wish him well as Leader of the Opposition. I hope he stays there for a very, very long time. Mr Speaker.
Order.
Mr Speaker, when the ABCC is abolished, the Fair Work Ombudsman will still enforce the Fair Work Act in the construction sector. We come with a very simple principle, which is that why should one worker in one sector be treated differently from workers in another sector? If people commit a crime, action should be taken by the appropriate authorities. And we're not going to take lectures from people who, when they commit issues that sees them go to the backbench, they come back as in leadership positions. We're not going to cop lectures from those opposite, from whom they presided over anything goes attitude towards taxpayers' money over the last 9 years.
Order. I give the call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In May, the Australian people voted for an Albanese Labor government with real plans to build a better future. Can the Prime Minister update the House on how the government is working towards that goal?
Here.
I'll call the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much for the question. I congratulate the honourable member on her election to this parliament, and I look forward to working with her and the other new members in this chamber across all sides of the parliament. On May 21, the Australian people voted for change, and we have hit the ground running as a new government. We haven't wasted a day. We put in the submission, as we said we would do, to say that people on the minimum wage of $20.33 an hour shouldn't go backwards. And remember, during the election campaign, I held up the dollar, and said that if people on the minimum wage got a $1 increase per hour in their wage from $20.33, then the sky wouldn't fall in. Those opposite said it would wreck the whole economy. That's right. Well, we got a decision out of the Fair Work Commission of 5.2%, and I'm very pleased that occurred. We also acted very quickly, faster than any previous government has, to deal with the natural disaster of the floods that have hit Queensland and New South Wales once again. We had the ADF on the ground quicker than ever before. We had payments in people's bank accounts quicker than any previous natural disaster. We've also worked to make sure that people get access to antivirals and their force shots and to promote that in order to deal with the pandemic. But we're also planning for the future. Legislation introduced just today in our first week to create Jobs and Skills Australia. Legislation to fix the aged care crisis, responding to the Aged Care Royal Commission. Legislation for our climate change target of 43% by 2030, something that we've already submitted to the UNFCCC through our nationally determined contribution. But we've also worked very hard to restore our relationships around the world. The truth is that we had major problems with our relationships in the Pacific with our European neighbours, particularly France, but also problems with the relationships with the United States and other countries. We hit the ground running very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. Indeed, on the Monday morning, we were off to the Quad Leaders meeting in Tokyo, where we successfully met with President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida and Prime Minister Modi. What we are about as a government is strength in our common purpose. We have an overriding philosophy of no one held back and no one left behind, and that is the program that this government will be proud to implement over this term and beyond.
Order. I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, officials from the CFMEU have been charged with thousands of offences. Has the Prime Minister met with any of the many union bosses from the CFMEU accused of criminal behaviour, including sexual assault, harassment and rape?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Yes or no?
Mr Speaker, if the member opposite has an allegation or wants to know if someone I've met with, he should say it. He should say it. What we've no, he hasn't.
Order.
No, he hasn't. If he wants to name somebody and ask if I've met with them, he's perfectly entitled to. What he's not entitled to do is to engage in that sort of smear tactic, which is what that question represents.
Order. I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, I don't know whether this is a point of order, but it's certainly not an answer to the question. Have you met with these officials that have been charged with sexual harassment, sexual assault and rape?
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. There's no point of order. I call the Prime Minister.
Finish.
You've concluded your answer? I give the call to the member for Lyons. Order.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer update the House on the latest global and domestic economic data? What does it mean for Australia's economy and how's the government responding?
I call the Treasurer.
Good. Name them.
Congratulations, Speaker, on your election, and thank you to my colleague for the first question of this new parliament for me. Australians are paying a really hefty price for a decade of messed up priorities and missed opportunities. And the denial and the delay and the division hasn't been accidental, it's been deliberate from those opposite. And Australians right around the country are paying a hefty price for their economic failures, Mr Speaker. And what it means is that Australians are more vulnerable now than they should be to the sorts of economic turbulence that we are seeing around the world and here at home as well. If you think about the global forecasts released by the International Monetary Fund overnight, they show that the global economy is heading down a precarious and perilous path. They have substantially downgraded their expectations for global growth. And so the challenges facing the global economy are substantial, they are growing, they will be with us for some time, and they will be impacting on us here at home. And the starkest evidence of that so far is the news that we got this morning about the June quarter inflation figure, the CPI, which was 6.1%, the highest for some decades. And what's been obvious for some time now is that we have in our economy high and rising inflation, falling real wages, and our ability to deal with some of these challenges is constrained by a budget which is absolutely heaving with $1 trillion in Liberal debt that we have inherited. Now, what those opposite have done, and the member for whom was front and centre in all of this, is they have bequeathed to a new government an energy crisis, a skills crisis and a cost of living crisis. And we didn't make this mess, Mr Speaker, but we take responsibility for cleaning it up. And our plan is all about making childcare cheaper, making medicines cheaper, getting real wages growing again in this country, starting with the minimum wage. After a decade of stagnation, which hasn't been accidental, it's been deliberately imposed on the working people of this country by those opposite. Time and time again, we've seen the consequences of that. And so, Mr Speaker, I think what those opposite underestimate about the Australian people is there is an appetite in the Australian community for some real talk about our economic challenges. There is a hunger after a decade of division for Australians to come together and meet these economic challenges, and there is an understanding that a mess that it took you like 9 years to make will take longer than 9 weeks for us to clean up.
I call the member for Kennedy.
PM, you'll recall your Hughenden visit, a familiarisation with HIPCO's Ballot Farm thread irrigation, delivering to Australia $300 million every year forever. In the GG speech, the phrase "make money projects" sharply contrasts with the prevailing absorb money projects. PM, you're aware that Theodore's ballot irrigation created 30,000 farms, leading Queensland's ALP to win every non-metropolitan seat for 40 straight years. Could the House be assured that FITCO has another wonderful flagship?
The member's time has expired. Order. There was a question in that, but barely. I call the Prime Minister.
There was indeed, and I thank the member for Kennedy for his question. I also thank him for his hospitality up in his electorate. I have indeed visited Hewenden on 2 occasions with the member of.
Order.
I don't think that needed clarification from the member for Kennedy, but I thank him nonetheless for his goodwill. Indeed, I did potentially get into some difficulty in Hewenden in the pub by sitting on the wrong seat, apparently, that was reserved for a very large gentleman with a hat bigger than the member for Kennedy. But what we did when we looked there was exactly looked at infrastructure projects. And this project, the Hewenden Irrigation Project, I understand has had an initial business case that has been forwarded and will be examined by the department as is appropriate. I do also note that the Flinders Shire Council has been very supportive of the project, and I've met with the Mayor on a number of occasions. That part of the world has an enormous opportunity with projects like Big Kennedy and Little Kennedy and the Kidston project, a range of renewable energy projects, a range of water projects, a range of potential irrigation projects to expand agriculture. I've had the privilege in former capacities of visiting there with the member for Kennedy. I know that my colleague, the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Infrastructure will look at these projects. It, of course, fits in 2 categories of the Minister for Environment as well as looking at it in her capacity as the Minister for Water. Where we can, appropriately, with appropriate environmental protections, we should be looking at ways in which we can improve irrigation, expand our agricultural sector. It's important. Australia plays a role, and potentially a more important role, as food resources around the world become more scarce, for us to use the fact that we are such a vast island continent to expand that, and I look forward to working constructively with the member for Kennedy on that.
Order. Before I call the member for Bendigo, I'd like to welcome some people to question time. I'm pleased to inform the House we have joining us in the gallery the Honourable Anastasia Palaszczuk MP, Premier of Queensland and Minister for the Olympics. And just as important, the Honourable Cameron Dick, Treasurer of Queensland and Minister for Trade and Investment. In addition, I'd like to welcome in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery, we have members of the Prime Minister's family and an old friend of the Prime Minister. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you all. I call the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture. Given the outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Indonesia, what steps has the government taken to prevent the disease spreading to Australia and affecting our livestock industry?
I call the Minister. Order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I, as it's the first time I've had the chance to congratulate you for your elevation to the chair. And can I thank the member for Bendigo for her question. I know many of us who represent regional and rural Australia are very exercised about this issue. This is an issue the government takes very, very seriously. It is why we have introduced the toughest biosecurity measures that have ever been used in Australia. We know that FMD has been detected in over 70 countries, but of course immediate and pressing concern is the outbreak that is not under control in Indonesia. It's been detected in 22 of the 37 provinces. The government is taking a two-pronged approach by strengthening measures at our border, but also working with our partners in the region, particularly Indonesia, to prevent an outbreak coming here to these shores. We've committed so far an additional $14 million in funding to strengthen Australia's prevention preparedness for FMD and to provide immediate support to Indonesia. In Indonesia itself, we have provided 1 million doses, or are providing 1 million doses of the FMD vaccine. The government has assisted through the provision of technical support of FMD and the broader vaccination program. We also have CSIRO's Centre for Disease Preparedness is working with the Indonesian Ministry of Agriculture to provide laboratory support and also essential materials. We've got the Indonesian government, we've helped them with signage and with biosecurity measures for outgoing Australian passengers at Denpasar Airport. We're doing everything we can to support our neighbours. It is in the interest of this country that we do so, and they get this under control as quickly as possible, and we're confident that the Indonesian authorities are doing all they can. Here in Australia, of course, we've funded additional biosecurity officers, redeployed biosecurity detector dogs to this task, the activation of biosecurity powers which have never been actually used before in this country, additional signage and distribution of flyers at major airports, deployment of sanitation mats, expanded social media campaigns and informing travellers of their biosecurity responsibilities. But what we do know, absolutely and utterly, is that one of the highest risks is if people illegally import meat or dairy products. We know that we've got biosecurity officers checking around certain retail outlets at the moment. Those imports have been stopped, and also checking all mail. But what my message is, particularly to the Australian people and particularly to those opposite, this is a very important task for all of us. Anyone coming in from these airports, declare, declare, declare. Absolutely make sure that you do your part to ensure that we maintain this important trade, including not jeopardising the export of this important product.
Order. I'll give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to comments you just made that the construction watchdog is a waste of taxpayer money. The watchdog is currently pursuing CFMEU official Gerard McCrudden for allegedly pushing, shoving and verbally abusing a female health and safety manager. Does the Prime Minister seriously believe that pursuing this vile behaviour is a waste of taxpayers' money? And why is Labor making a bad situation worse?
I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much for the question. I believe that if someone commits assault, they should be charged with assault and dealt with. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. I'm surprised that you don't. This seems to be a controversial issue. But I make this point. I make this point.
Order.
I make this point.
Point of order. Prime Minister will resume his...
No, she made...
Order. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. I haven't given you the call. Are you making a point of order? Well, wait. Just wait. I'll call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr.
What is
Speaker.
the point of order?
That is an imputation against every member on this side. The Prime Minister just said, if you don't believe assault is a serious matter. Of course we believe assault is a serious matter. He should withdraw.
Resume your seat. Manager, that is not a point of order. I call the Prime Minister.
Speaker, the irony. The question suggested that. That was the point. The point of the question was that I wouldn't regard that behaviour. That is precisely what I was asked. Precisely what I was asked. And my answer was, where someone commits a crime, they should be charged with a crime of assault if they commit assault. That's what my view was. But I tell you what the ABCC have spent their money on. $500,000 of taxpayers' money on an unsuccessful case brought against a union who requested that a women's toilet be available on a work site.
Order. I call the Leader of the Opposition. Is it a point of order, and what is the point of order?
It is a point of order, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance, and it goes to the serious nature of the question that was put to the Prime Minister. He's not answering that, and he's choosing to belittle the question that was put. Instead of playing games and getting frustrated, he should answer the question about the harassment.
The point of order is not irrelevant. Is not relevant. The Prime Minister is answering the question and has answered the question, and I ask him to continue.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. ABCC spent over $500,000 as well of taxpayers' money enforcing a blanket ban on putting stickers and posters with union logos up on worksites. A whole lot of people die on worksites in the construction sector. Die. There is massive.
Order. The Prime Minister will continue and to be heard in silence.
I've made it very clear that where someone commits a crime, they should be charged with it. I've never heard of this bloke. Never heard of him. No connection with him. And the idea somehow that we're going to come in here, the idea we're going to come in here, it says a lot about why they're sitting opposite. Why they're sitting opposite. That they come in here today and they could ask questions about inflation, they could ask questions about cost of living, they could ask questions about the health pandemic, they could ask questions about foot and mouth disease, they could ask questions about a whole range of issues, and what do we get? Back to the same old bucket. The same old bucket that saw them have a royal commission into trade unions, that saw them have a royal commission into, at the time, current and former Labor leaders effectively, spend millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on what was a political pursuit. The federal court said this about the ABCC for its prosecutions. It labelled them unnecessarily inflammatory and conducted as a blood sport. Politics should be better than that, but I'm not surprised that the opposition isn't. Order.
I give the call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Can the Deputy Prime Minister outline how the Albanese Labor government will deliver our next generation of submarines and what changes he is making to ensure these can be delivered?
I give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate you on your appointment to high office, and can I thank the member for Solomon for his question and acknowledge his service to the Australian Defence Force. Submarines matter for an economy of our size. The potency of our Defence Force is going to be defined by the quality of our capabilities, and there is no asset that we can have which will give rise to a greater question mark in any adversary's mind than a long-range capable submarine. And as we look forward to the end of this decade and into the 2030s, increasingly that will become synonymous with a nuclear-propelled submarine, which is why the Albanese government is completely committed to acquiring that capability. And I can report that in my meetings with the United States, there is an incredible shared sense of mission with them and with the United Kingdom in helping Australia to gain this capability, which is important because to do this will be one of the great national projects in our history. But that project has been made so much more difficult by the negative legacy which has been left to us by the 9 years of inept government of those opposite. In 2013, when the coalition came to power, the successor to the Collins submarine, our current capability, was due in the middle of the 2020s this decade, in the next few years. To start with, they went off to Japan to try and have the submarines built there, and then they backed out. They then signed an agreement with France, and 5 years later they ripped that up. In the process, precious years were wasted. Billions of dollars were spent on absolutely nothing, and great offence was caused to two countries which are so important to our future. At every moment, their decision-making was guided by their own politics. Indeed, the day on which we saw Australia's submarine capability tossed around their party room in the empty chair challenge against Tony Abbott was perhaps the moment when a party of government in this country showed the greatest contempt to the Australian people. They spent 9 years yelling at the world while doing absolutely nothing to advance our capability and our national interests. Well, this country is now under a new management. There's a serious group of people who are in charge, and we understand the challenge that we face. We know the difficult calls that are going to be made, but what we can say is this. Whatever we face, there is only one interest which is going to guide the effort we make, the decisions we take, and that interest is the national interest, a national interest which is defined by the national security of the Australian people.
I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture. I refer to the Chief Veterinary Officer's briefing to the opposition on Thursday, where he advised that foot and mouth disease is uncontrolled and increasing, and to a subsequent comment from the Minister for Agriculture on Monday that Indonesia seems to be getting ahead of it. Who's correct? And has this confusion caused thousands of passengers to cross the border from Indonesia without proper screening and without disinfectant foot mats? Why is Labor making a bad situation worse?
I give the call. Order. I give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Order. I give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry.
I'll tell you who's confused. What's your position on border closures? We've had one position put by you, one position put by all sorts of different members. What have you actually had in terms of your actual position?
Order.
Again, can I say very, very clearly, this is an issue the government takes very seriously. We are taking the advice of the Chief Vet.
Order.
We are taking the advice of the Agriculture Department. We have been rolling out sanitation mats, and I don't care who wants to claim credit for that, but that is there, and they are putting in place now. We know that this is a serious threat to Australia's biosecurity, and this government has put in place the most serious measures, the most comprehensive measures of any government that we have ever seen.
I give the call to the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister update the House on how the government is responding to economic circumstances, helping people with cost of living challenges and setting Australia up for the future?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, and I congratulate the member for Jagga Jagga on her re-election to this place. Australians are worried about cost of living. When they go to the checkout, compared with a year ago, they might have to put some goods back because they simply don't have enough cash to pay for it when the bills go up on the cash register. That is happening every day. They're worried if they can afford to put a roof over their heads, and they're worried about rising interest rates. Indeed, we inherited a challenging economy, and we didn't attempt to hide the challenges that would be ahead of us, because the RBA, of course, had already said prior to the change of government that there would be an increase in inflation and an increase in interest rates. But, of course, there are two things that impact, particularly for working people, their standard of living. One is the cost of living. The second is what do their wages look like. And that's why we have a plan to lift wages as opposed to the previous plan where low wages were a deliberate design feature of the economy. We have a plan to deal with that, but we also have a plan as well to create economic growth. And we want to do that in an inclusive way. I spoke to the Business Council of Australia this morning, and they are very much looking forward to participating in the Jobs and Skills Summit that will host in Parliament House in a bit over a month's time, because that is how you bring society together, bring business, unions, civil society, so that you can increase profits and increase wages, but only if you are lifting productivity at the same time. And we have a plan to lift productivity. We have a plan to deal with clean energy, to use that clean energy to enable new industries to grow and thrive. We have a plan through our National Reconstruction Fund to build back stronger, to identify where we can make more things here in Australia through advanced manufacturing. We have a plan for cheaper childcare, and we'll be introducing legislation to achieve that outcome down the track. We have a plan, of course, for cheaper medicines as well. We have a plan to make sure that Australians can fill the jobs that will be created in these new industries through the creation of Jobs and Skills Australia, through fee-free TAFE and through additional university places. These are all important if you want a high-wage, high-productivity economy that delivers for the Australian people. That's our plan, one in which we use our common purpose in order to shape the future instead of letting the future shape us. That is the way that you build a better future, and my government is absolutely determined to do just that.
I'll give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and congratulations on your elevation. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, during the campaign, Labor promised a $275 decrease in household power bills. Will the Prime Minister guarantee to the House that Australian families will see that $275 cut?
Order, order. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Let's just set you up on that one. You made this mess.
I thank the member for Hume for his question, and I congratulate him on his courage in asking it.
They've set you up already.
The paradox of the last government was that they were obsessed with power, but they totally failed on energy. Totally failed when it came to energy. And Australian families are paying the price for that failure. Let's have a look at what happened opposite when it comes to power prices.
Order.
I was asked about power prices. Okay. Waste your point of order.
That we're only a short time in the question, so I'll call the Leader of the Opposition if this is on relevance, but I'll listen carefully. Order.
Mr Speaker,
what is the point of order?
It's on relevance, and we spent yesterday with you talking about the standards within this place, and it's very clear that, in the words of Speaker Smith, given the tightness of this question, the Prime Minister needs to answer the question and restrict himself to the question.
Order. The Leader will resume his seat. The question was specific, and it mentioned during the campaign. The Prime Minister is in order, and I'll listen carefully to what he's saying. If you want a different answer, you'll have to ask a different question. But I will call the Prime Minister. But I will be listening carefully.
And I will go directly to the campaign and what happened, because this is what happened. And this was what we didn't know was happening while the campaign was on. But they knew.
Order.
They knew.
Order.
They knew. They knew about the price increase.
Order.
In March.
The member for Petrie.
Because what we know is that one of the previous government's final acts was to hide that energy prices would be going up in July. They were advised.
Order.
They were advised in March that the default mark offer price, which for a household in New South Wales increased by up to 19.7%, in Queensland up to 12.8%. They knew about it in March, but days before the election was called, they made a conscious decision to keep the information from Australians until after the election. And who might that have been? Who might that have been?
Order.
Who might that have been?
Order.
It was the member for Hume. It was the member for Hume. Was the actual minister at the time. What we will do is deliver an energy policy. It'll be the first one we've had in this country for a decade. For a decade. They had 22 announcements and didn't deliver one. Didn't deliver one.
Order. The Prime Minister will just take his seat for a moment. We've already had one point of order on relevance. I will call the manager. I'll give you the call.
Making the point that he is defying your rule, Mr Speaker.
Everyone, just be quiet for 1 second. Manager, we've had the point of order. What is your point of order?
You need to bring the Prime Minister to comply.
No, there is no point of order.
There
is no point of order. I'll call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about energy and energy prices, and I was
Order,
asked about what happened during the campaign.
Members on
and
my
what
left.
happened during the campaign was that we promised an energy policy, just one, and we will deliver it. And we will deliver it through our Powering Australia plan. Those opposite had 22 announcements, didn't deliver one. Even when the NEG, the National Energy Guarantee, went through the Liberal Party room twice. It went twice through the Liberal Party room. Instead of implementing the policy, they just rolled their leader.
Order. I give the call to the member for Paterson.
Thank you and congratulations, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. The Royal Commission report into aged care quality and safety revealed the shocking neglect of our aged care system. Can the Minister advise the House on how the new government is addressing the current failings in aged care?
I give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
And I thank the member for Paterson for both her question and her powerful advocacy in trying to drive up eligible Australians to get their third and fourth vaccines. As well as yourself, Mr Speaker, lending your voice to the imperative of winter vaccinations in aged care, when together we visited Cinnamon Village in your electorate of Oxley a few weeks ago, a community in Queensland that receives some really standout representation about both a federal and a state level, may I note, to be on the ground with our mobile vaccination teams, learning from their work. Alongside your constituents John and Jane, I got my fourth dose as part of our efforts to drive up vaccination rates, a focus of our winter plan in aged care. Mr Speaker, I only regret that I can't follow that lovely team of dedicated clinical legends around the country getting my fourth dose at every facility to drive up awareness and vaccination rates. Such is my determination to leave no stone unturned in getting aged care through winter. But alas, I am advised that that would be against the medical advice, and we on this side of the House actually follow the medical advice. Where are your masks? Mr Speaker, the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety's final report challenged us all to create a better aged care system. It challenged us to deliver an aged care system which gives older Australians the security, dignity and quality that they deserve, that their families and their loved ones deserved, and that the workforce that looks after them so tenderly deserves as well. The Royal Commission did not say that reform would be easy, but it did say that it would be crucial, and it mapped out the roadmap for us to do just that. The former government packed much of that roadmap into the too hard basket and piffed it into the long grass and continued their neglect of the aged care sector and those that rely upon it. The Royal Commission asked the former government to do 148 things. The Royal Commission's damning report itself said that the former coalition government's main consideration was that the minimum commitment that it could get away with. And even after that searing indictment, that clarion call of the Royal Commission, the former government's approach did not change. Because in the 17 months between receiving the Royal Commission final report and losing office, this former government implemented only 6% of the Commission's recommendations. This former government implemented only 9 of 148 recommendations of the Royal Commission. This new Labor government is not afraid of tackling the challenges before us. Only earlier today I introduced 2 bills to this House, one of which was the very first bill to pass this House, an aged care bill, because for this government aged care is a top priority, our first bill through. And in our first full day of parliamentary business, we have already passed—
The minister's time has concluded. Order. Order. I give the call to the honourable member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Education. Minister, the recent 650% increase in HECS help indexation is an entirely unreasonable and indeed crippling impost on a great many Australians, especially coming as it does so soon after the previous government's reduction of the compulsory repayment threshold. Minister, education in this country was too expensive already. Will you urgently review the indexation rate and bring some soaring cost of living relief to the 2.9 million Australians lumbered with a HECS help debt?
I call the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Clark? I know, as many members of this House know, the power and the importance of education. I think the member for Clark knows that very well as do you, Mr Speaker. Congratulate you on your election. I also note the comments you made yesterday about the Parliament in Schools program and how important that is. I'm looking forward to working with you on that. In answer to the member for Clark's question, last year the indexation rate was 0.6. This year it's 3.9. That's calculated based on CPI over the last 2 years. The member for Clark mentions the cost of living, and in that regard it's important to remember that help payments are set as a set percentage of your income. In other words, they don't go up unless your salary does. That said, the issue of affordability is an important one, and it will be one of the things that will be looked at by the government as part of the Universities Accord process. It's important to make this point, Mr Speaker. When HECS was first introduced in 1989, less than 8% of Australians had a university degree. That percentage now stands at around about 33%, and HECS is largely responsible for that. Amongst younger Australians, that percentage is even higher. I think more than 43% of Australians now have a university degree, younger Australians. But that figure hides another fact, and that is the fact that kids from poorer families are less likely to go to preschool, less likely to finish high school, and less likely to get a university degree. And where you live also matters. My friends on both sides of the House who represent regional areas will know this. About 48% of young people in our major cities have a university degree, but that percentage in regional Australia is around about 20%. And for our Indigenous brothers and sisters, that percentage is even lower. Something like less than 10% of Indigenous Australians have a university degree. We've got to do something about that. I don't want us to be a country where your opportunities in life depend on your postcode, your parents, or the colour of your skin. And that's why this Accord process is so important. Soon I'll be announcing a group of eminent Australians who will lead that work, and they'll look at everything from the sorts of things I'm talking about here, access for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, from the regions, Indigenous Australians, but it'll also look at transparency, regulation, employment conditions, how our universities and TAFEs work together, and also this, the issue that you have raised, Member for Clark, the issue of affordability and the sorts of concerns that you've raised in your question.
Give the call to the member for Bruce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. What policy changes is the government making to ensure that seniors are not going to be forced to use the cruel cashless debit card to access their pension?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services. Order. Order. The Minister will be heard in silence. The member for Longman. I just asked the House if the Minister could be heard in silence, and you interjected straight away. Can we cease the interjections at least until the Minister starts talking? The Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, I think, Mr Speaker. Look, I would like to thank the member for Bruce for this question. I know how passionate he has been listening to the concerns of people on the cashless debit card and, of course, the concerns right around this country with this unfair policy. Labor wants welfare and social security to be a strong safety net that supports vulnerable Australians when they need it, not stigmatise them like the former government did. And that is why Labor has decisively acted to deliver on its election commitment to abolish the cashless debit card. Now, earlier today, I introduced legislation to start the task of dismantling the Coalition's cashless debit card experiment. And I want to reassure the member for Bruce that seniors will no longer have to worry that their pension might get linked with the card, because no one in this country will have to worry about it, because we're getting rid of it. And we are ending the experiment of privatised welfare in this country. Of course, the cashless debit card was an ideological obsession by the former Coalition government. It was imposed on communities and kept rolling out.
Order.
And of course, it was completely.
Order.
I have, member for Aston.
The member for Aston.
I'll get to that. Of course, they imposed it on communities that did not want it and did not like it. And when the evidence came out, that it wasn't working, there was no evidence to support it, there were pleas from communities to end it, what did they do? They just kept rolling it out. They put ideology before evidence. They chose arrogance over consultation. This was the defining feature of the former Morrison government. Well, that is not what will happen under this government. The Prime Minister during the election campaign said this would be a priority if we were elected, to get rid of the cashless debit card, and we are getting on with the job. I have visited Ceduna, the East Kimberley, and the Assistant Minister for Social Services has visited Bundaberg and Harvey Bay and other communities we will be visiting in coming weeks. We are going to listen to First Nations communities, we are going to listen to service providers, and we are going to chart a way forward on what are complex, difficult social problems with real evidence-based solutions, not ideology gone wrong.
I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. Can the Minister inform the House as to whether he has met with any CFMEU officials regarding the abolition of the construction watchdog?
I give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. And can I also, before I answer that question, congratulate you, Mr Speaker, on your elevation to office, a well-deserved result in the election yesterday. Can I indicate to the House that I've not spoken to any official of the CFMEU in relation to this matter that's been asked of me by the honourable member.
I thank the Minister. I give the call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. Minister, what is the Albanese Labor government doing to address rising costs of living and reduce the cost of early childhood education to make it easier for mums, children and working families to get ahead?
I give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and may I also take this opportunity to congratulate you on your elevation to the chair. I'd like to thank the member for Dunkley for her question. I know that it's an issue that the member has a lot of interest in, and on behalf of the families and the children in her electorate of Dunkley. And like the member for Dunkley, many of us here on this side know that early childhood education is a vital investment in our children and indeed in our future. I've had the pleasure of visiting early childhood education centres with the member for Lalor and with the member for Bendigo and seeing the real difference that that's making, good quality early childhood education is making to families and to children. It's an issue of deep concern to this Labor government that early childhood education costs more now than it ever has before. And it's why the Labor government took a plan for affordable and quality early childhood education to the last election. May I take this opportunity to pay heed to my predecessor in this space, the Minister for Social Services, who, as the Shadow Minister, was the architect of Labor's plan and who continues to be a fierce advocate for early childhood education. On this side of the chamber, Mr Speaker, we know that childcare costs are eating a bigger and bigger hole in the household budgets and putting more financial strain on families. Almost 73,000 families are locked out of a childcare system because it is unaffordable. Now that means that children are missing out on important early learning, and parents, and in most cases mothers who are the primary caregivers, are not able to work the hours they want, they're not able to progress their careers, and they're not able to contribute to the household finances in the ways in which they would like to. Labor's cheaper childcare plan will make early childhood education more affordable for 1.26 million families by increasing our childcare subsidy rate. Now, a big part of that is a plan for the ACCC to design a price regulation mechanism that will drive down out-of-pocket costs for families. We've committed to a comprehensive review of the childcare sector through the Productivity Commission,
with the aim of implementing a universal 90% childcare subsidy for all families. These reforms aren't just about the economy, they're also about increased workforce participation. They're about women being able to go back to work in the capacity in which they want to go back to work and participate in the workforce. It means that early childhood educators are valued for their vital work. But importantly, these reforms are about ensuring all children have access to quality, affordable early learning, investing in their future and in ours.
Give the call to the member for Durack.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that senior judges of the Federal Court have described the CFMEU's workplace behaviour as notorious, an embarrassment to the trade union movement, which displays an outrageous disregard for Australian industrial norms? Given the Prime Minister's decision to abolish the dedicated construction industry watchdog, would this simply make a bad situation worse and increase the cost of new schools and hospitals?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. And I'm asked about the Federal Court and the CFMEU and the ABCC. This is what the Federal Court did in 2017 that I'm aware of. It blasted the ABCC for wasting time and taxpayers' money on prosecuting two CFMEU officials for, to quote from the Federal Court decision, having a cup of tea with a mate. Having a cup of tea with a mate. And this is what Justice North described as, of the Federal Court described it as a minuscule, insignificant affair. And then Justice North said this is all external forces that are beating up what's just a really ordinary situation that amounts to virtually nothing. That's the Federal Court's ruling in the decision. And then, and then this Federal Court Justice North said this, quote, "For goodness sake, I don't know what this inspectorate is doing." And he went on to say this.
Order. The Prime Minister...
Really?
Is the manager of opposition seeking the call? I will give you the call. I'll call the manager.
Well, the point of order is on relevance, Mr Speaker. It's a very tightly worded question. CFMEU workplace behaviour described as notorious, an embarrassment to the trade union movement, and the Prime Minister needs to engage with the terms of the question.
The manager will resume his seat. There is no point of order. The question was specific regarding was the Prime Minister aware of senior judges in the Federal Court? The Prime Minister is referring to that matter with his answer, so there is no point of order. I call the Prime Minister.
It's just extraordinary. I can't be more specific. The Justice North went on to say this when the ABCC was talking about use public resources to bring the bar down to this level. It really calls into question the exercise of the discretion to proceed. That is what they had to say at that time. The Federal Court has also dismissed the ABCC for its prosecutions, labelling them unnecessarily inflammatory and, another quote, conducted as a blood sport. That's what the Federal Court have had to say about these actions that the member raised, and I thank her very much for her question.
I call the member for Cunningham.
Thank you and congratulations, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. Can the Minister please inform the House how the Albanese Labor government will address skills shortages, improve employment opportunities and economic growth as part of its plan to strengthen vocational education and training?
I call the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. And I'd like to thank my friend and the member for Cunningham for the question and congratulate her on election to this place, a fantastic community champion for the region, and I've known you for many years. It's great to see you in this place representing your constituency. And it's true to say that the constituency of Wollongong and that region really understand the need to respond to the skills crisis in this country. They understand how important it is for workers and businesses to have the skills that are in demand. And so too does this government, Mr Speaker. And that's why the first bill introduced by this government today was to create Jobs and Skills Australia, working with employers and unions, working with state and territory governments, training providers and others, to make sure we fill the skill shortages across the labour market, across the economy. In many sectors, of course, those shortages are very acute indeed. Now, Mr Speaker, we have got a very big agenda when it comes to this area. We understand how important it is to our economy. We are dealing with, in fact, we've inherited one of the largest public debts for any government. And if we're going to deal with those challenges, we have to grow the economy. And the way to grow the economy, or at least one of the ways to grow the economy, is to invest in skills and training. But to invest billions of dollars of taxpayers' money in this area at the state and federal level, we need to understand those shortages. We need to understand where they are. We need to make sure we precisely anticipate the areas of emerging demand. And that's why we create this body, working with the states and territories, as I say, and working with employers and unions and others. And that's also why we're placing TAFE back at the centre of vocational training. TAFE has been under-resourced, it's been unrecognised, in many cases neglected by the previous government. I'll just remind people of this. The first visit in Victoria of the Prime Minister after the election was to a TAFE college. That says everything about the priorities of the Prime Minister and this government about addressing these skill shortages in this country. So we need to do a lot more. There are shortages, of course, and many people know where they are. There are shortages in aged care, disability care, children's services. The care industries generally are really in need of supply of skills and labour. The OECD says we have the second worst, if you like, or the second highest labour shortage in the developed world. So this is a job that needs to be tackled immediately. And it's not just for industry, it's not just for our economy, it's not just for employers, it's for workers. To provide them the skills that they need, that are in demand, means that they will have better, secure employment going forward. We've got a big agenda. We can't wait to get down to it. And we started today by introducing that bill to the House.
The minister's time has expired. I give the call to the member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the government's decision to abolish the construction watchdog. Why is the government prioritising the interests of their union bosses ahead of tackling important issues in regional Australia, such as rising construction costs? Why is Labor making a bad situation worse?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about the government's priorities, and we showed our priorities this morning with the first bills that we introduced for the clean energy target of 43% by 2030, for the aged care reforms, for the creation of Jobs and Skills Australia, all of the legislation that we did as well for 10 days paid domestic and family violence leave. That's where we're showing our priorities. And we show our priorities through the legislation that we introduce. The opposition is showing its priorities through the questions which they're asking. And people will draw their own conclusions. But I make this point about industrial relations at the workplace. Australians must have a workplace relations system that is based upon fairness, that's based on mutual trust and respect, and obeying the rule of law. And the rule of law should be obeyed constantly.
Order.
Constantly. And where there are breaches of the rule of law, either by unions or employers, including in the construction industry, then the rule of law should apply. I have a simple view, though, that all workers should be subject to the same laws and regulations as others. That is simply our view. It's been our view since when we opposed the creation of this body. It's been our view throughout. I wouldn't really say 20 years. I'd say since 1891. Our view has been that in workplaces, workers deserve a fair go, and that when that occurs through their representatives, unions should behave appropriately. And where they don't, action should be taken, and where employers don't behave appropriately, action should be taken. But what we see with the ABCC, just like the ROC, the Registered Organisations Commission, what we've seen is a politicisation. What we saw, remember the whiteboard over there and the minister hiding behind it. Remember the tip-offs to the media for raids on the AWU. How did that go? And how much money, how much taxpayers' funds were used in pursuing something that was then abandoned? My view is very clear, that all workers should be treated equally, that unions should behave properly, that employer organisations should behave properly, and that there is a common interest between unions and employers, which is why they will be brought together in the Jobs and Skills Summit.
Order. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the minister please outline the Albanese government's plan to take long overdue action on climate change, and how will this plan address rising energy prices and deliver more jobs?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Fremantle for his question and recognise his long career of advocacy and action on climate change. And the Albanese government was elected to take action on climate change, and that's exactly what we've been doing. On the 16th of June, the Prime Minister and I notified the United Nations of our new climate targets, the country's new target of 43%. We were accompanied by the Business Council of Australia, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Australian Industry Group, peak climate groups, representing this Prime Minister's determination to bring Australians together on this important national challenge. And we've taken other action, of course. We've put ARENA to work on the task it was created for, changing the regulations so it focuses on renewable energy. That's what the R stands for, renewable energy. We've issued regulations to reduce the amount of sulphur in our petrol, better for our health and environment. And internationally, Mr Speaker, I've signed an agreement with Secretary Granholm, the US Secretary of Energy, on a zero-emissions task force. And, of course, we will ensure and have ensured that the Australian carbon credit market operates with integrity and is seen to operate with integrity, which the previous government ignored. That's what we've been doing. And, of course, Mr Speaker, today was the next step. I introduced on behalf of the government's climate bill. This is important. It enshrines in law those targets. It provides the framework for investment. It provides the framework for investment. And that's what the business community wants. That's why the Business Council's called for the legislation to be passed. The Chamber of Commerce and Industry has called for the legislation to be passed. They know that this is necessary, but there are some in this House, Mr Speaker, who think they know more about business than the Business Council, mainly the Leader of the Opposition. He announced, without seeing the bill, without referring to his shadow cabinet, without taking it to his party room, that they were against the bill. They were against. He'd heard enough. It was action on climate change and he's against it. He'd heard enough, Mr Speaker. This is the decade of denial and delay that they want to continue. We had 22 energy policies, and they couldn't land one. They couldn't deliver what they announced. The previous Minister for Energy promised almost $1 billion of new generation. They didn't deliver 1 watt. Not 1 watt, not enough to boil a kettle. Could the Minister for Energy deliver under the previous government? And as we've heard, on the 6th of April, he amended the industry code for energy retailers so that they hid a 19.7% energy price rise. Well, I wonder if that had anything to do with the election called 4 days later. We've got a lot to do, Mr Speaker. There's been a decade of denial and delay. We haven't got a second to waste, and nor are we going to waste one.
I give the call to the Leader of the Greens.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I congratulate the Prime Minister and the government on their election and the Treasurer to whom I ask this question. Labor's Stage 3 tax cuts will cost the public over $220 billion and give billionaires like Clive Palmer a $9,000 a year handout at the taxpayer's expense. With inflation really biting and the government saying the budget's under pressure, will you ditch these unaffordable tax cuts for billionaires and put dental into Medicare instead to help relieve the cost of living pressures on everyday people?
I call the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Melbourne for his question. I congratulate him on his re-election, and I somewhat sheepishly acknowledge also the election of his colleagues on the crossbench as well. As the member for Melbourne knows, The legislated tax cuts are already in the budget and they don't come in for a couple of years, and we've said that we don't intend to change that. I think our position is well known on that, as is, respectfully, your position known on that as well. And we also should acknowledge that when it comes to those stage 3 tax cuts, even if your idea was to prevail, that wouldn't do anything about the near-term inflation challenges that we have right now. They come in 2 years down the track. Yes, we have budget challenges, but right now the most important thing that we can focus on is high and rising inflation, falling real wages, and some of our choices have been constrained. And so our priority when it comes to tax reform, first of all, I mean, the only legislation that I've introduced from this place on the first day is tax reform to make electric vehicles cheaper, and we're proud of that. We're proud of that, working closely with the Minister for Climate Change. That's our first priority in tax reform. But beyond that, when it comes to tax reform that helps repair the budget, you know that the member knows that our focus is on making multinationals pay their fair share of tax, as well as some measures around tax compliance, and also making sure that the foreign investment regime returns some money to the budget as well. So that's our priority when it comes to taxes and charges and repairing the budget. More broadly, when it comes to budget repair, you would be familiar, the member would be familiar, as is I think the whole House, particularly the member for Hume, would know all about this, is that we've inherited a lot of rorts and waste in the budget. And what the Finance Minister and I are doing is going through those rorts and going through that waste to make sure that we can cut it back where we can and fund other priorities, like investments in cleaner and cheaper and more reliable energy, like investments in skills, like the Skills Minister was talking about before, like our investments in childcare that the Childcare Minister was talking about. So when we repair the budget, we talk about taking unproductive, politically motivated spending, for which the member for Hume was a poster child, and directing it towards more productive spending in the budget. That begins with cutting back on rorts and waste, and it includes making sure that we're investing in the things that can get the economy growing the right way. Budget repair is part of that. Responsible investment is part of that. And I think the onus is on the whole parliament, crossbench, our side, their side of the parliament, Mr Speaker, to do what we can to try and repair the budget. We've had a decade now of rorts and waste, which has led to $1 trillion of debt with not enough to show for it. And so our efforts are directed towards making sure that every dollar that is borrowed, which now costs more to service, is actually delivering a dividend for the Australian people.
I give the call to the honourable member for Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Can the minister update the House on the findings of the Civ 915 report and its implications?
I call the Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Blair for his question. All of us in this House would acknowledge that this is a person who comes to work every day and acts with the utmost of integrity, and so it's no surprise to get the question from him today. Speaker, last week the Australian government made a decision to release a report written by Secretary Mike Pezzullo into the disgraceful actions of the former government to release information about a boat arrival on election day on the 21st of May. This was the former government sabotaging protocols that protect Operation Sovereign Borders and protect the people in uniform who do dangerous and difficult work. One of the truly outrageous things about the Secretary's report is that it details the fact that the decision was made by the former Minister for Home Affairs to release this information while the operation was on foot. This is without precedent in the history of Operation Sovereign Borders. And what it meant was that an operation that was being undertaken by Border Force and Defence Force officials was undermined by the Shadow Minister, who now sits opposite me. The report also details, Speaker, the fact that, despite the fact that the Prime Minister at the time asked the Minister for Home Affairs to release the statement herself, she chose not to do that. Instead, she put the acid on a Defence Force official who wears uniform for our country to make the statement for her. And that, Speaker, was an act of cowardice. If you are going to politicise this operation, you do it yourself and you put your name to the work that you do. Now, the Shadow Minister opposite had an opportunity—
The Minister for Home Affairs will resume her seat. The member for Petrie on a point of order, and I would invite the member to state the point of order.
Reflecting on a member, Mr Speaker, congratulate you on your position, but the minister just reflected on this minister.
The member for Petrie will resume his seat. The member for Petrie will resume. The member will resume his seat. The member will resume his seat. I call the Leader of the House on the point of order.
To the point of order, Mr Speaker, because the standing order on reflections on members is a very important one. It is very important. But it doesn't extend to explaining what a member in fact did. If the actions are taken to be, well, that's terrible that the person did that and a whole lot of conclusions are drawn, that's on the member. The standing order is not there to protect members from the accurate description of what they did.
Just on the point of order, before I rule, the manager of opposition business.
Mr Speaker, the relevant standing order says that all imputations of improper motives to a member and all personal reflections on other members shall be considered highly disorderly, and so it should be withdrawn. It was disorderly.
I thank the manager. The minister. Order. Minister for Climate Change. Listening to the minister carefully, she didn't reflect directly on the former minister. Standing Order 90 is important. She was referring to the situation. She did not refer directly to the minister, but if she did, I would enforce Standing Order 90. I want to make it clear. Order. The member for Petrie. Order. Order. It's close enough. Order. Order. I intend to enforce the standing orders, and particularly Standing Order 90. In this case, the minister did not reflect directly on the member. I will listen carefully to her and to all members to ensure that standing order is enforced. I call the minister. No. Order. There is no point of order. I call the minister. The minister can take her seat. I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, I just want to, with all due respect to you, just take you up on the point of your recollection of what was a very clear statement by the minister. Now, I hope that she's able to step up and clarify for you that it was, in fact, a direct reflection on the minister, on the shadow minister. The minister, in her statement, made a comment directly in relation to the shadow minister about actions that she took that resulted in a uniformed officer, etc. So that was a direct reflection on the shadow minister.
I thank the Leader. Resume your seat. I'll ask the minister directly. Was she reflecting on the member?
I was reflecting on the conduct of the member, Speaker. Those are two different things.
Order. Order. Manager of Opposition Business. I thank the minister and I'll ask her to continue with her answer.
Thank you. And I'd really invite those opposite to consider this. If you don't want to be accused of acts of cowardice, if you don't want to be...
The minister may resume her seat. I call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, we've just heard the minister effectively say yes in answer to your question.
She didn't. Resume your seat. She didn't say that. Resume your seat. The minister, in continuation, to the question, directly to the question.
Yes, I'd like to say to those opposite, if you don't want to be accused of acts of cowardice and if you don't want to be accused of breaching your duty and the trust you owe to the Australian people, don't do it. Don't do what's in this report. I don't need to make it up. We've got a report here on the public record that outlines the disgraceful conduct of the former government. Now, the Shadow Minister opposite has had an opportunity to defend herself. Any of us accused of these things would come forward and apologise. But that's not what we heard. We heard a denial that the apolitical mandate of the public service was subverted. Wrong. It's in the report. A denial that she put pressure on the public service. It's in the report. Now, I just want to close by saying this. We should not become inured to these things in our democracy. This was a disgraceful, unprecedented act that should never have happened, and those opposite stand condemned for doing it.
I call the Prime Minister.
On that note, Mr Speaker, I'd ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister.